This is BBC Two, where we head for Blackpool for the final session of the Conservative Party conference, introduced by Sheena MacDonald.
Hello and welcome back to the Conservative Party conference in Blackpool. True to tradition, top of the bill, the final act in this four-day show is the speech of the party leader. And after a year of stresses and strains, the Prime Minister should be well prepared to deliver a speech of which much is expected. And yet, how can he satisfy the varied and opposed constituencies that we've seen pressed together this week under the seasonal banner of unity? Is John Major's insistence that he is his own man, backed up by his own vision? And does how he says what he says have any bearing on his standing as a leader with the conference and in the country? The hall is crammed. As you can see, representatives have gathered with their props and their accoutrements, ready to enjoy as well as assess what happens here this afternoon. Here in the balcony, armed only with wit, wisdom and pencils, are three seasoned Westminster watchers who have been with us throughout the conference season: Michael White of The Guardian, George Jones of The Telegraph and Alistair Campbell of Today. Now, I seem to remember last week we said John Smith had to make the speech of a lifetime. Is John Major's speech this afternoon of similar importance, Alistair Campbell?
Well, he only has to read a book or a poem or anything, he'll get a standing ovation from this lot, but the fact is that his position has been strengthened this week because of the welter of support, a welter of words of support that have come out from all sections of the party. But he's got to perform if he wants to make any impact upon the public, who frankly I think have seen about enough of the Tories this week.
I gather that you have had some advertisement of this speech already. We heard the news saying it was going to be a diatribe against the permissive society.
That's right. He intends to try and show his vision of conservatism in the 1990s. We're told it is a step back to the future, a return to traditional values. He wants to launch a crusade against the permissive society. He claims that everything went wrong in the 1960s. I'm not quite sure what's been happening over the last 14 years while the Tories have been in power, but he says that we showed we could do the things we couldn't do, like reform the trade unions, privatise. Now we're going to return to traditional values.
Is this all his own vision, Michael White?
Heaven knows. He's certainly a very nostalgic chap, instinctively, Mr. Major. And the country's been through a lot of changes the last 10, 20, 30 years. We understand why people want to get back to a sort of more secure feeling about things. I'm not sure they take too much notice of governments. After all, out there we've got a government which is suffering all the consequences of the permissive society as much as anybody else. We've got divorcees and adulterers and single mums like everyone else. So I think probably voters take it with a pinch of salt.
Well, Alistair Campbell says that he could read anything. He could read a book out and he would get his ovation. I mean, what we've seen this week is a conference that does seem to know where it's going. I don't know about the party or the government.
In a funny way, the Daily Mirror did the conference a favour by leaking Margaret Thatcher's book. It showed her up in a somewhat disloyal light. There was a speaker down there this morning who said, you know, we want loyalty, not about selling books. We're the workers who put you people there. And they all cheered. And there's no doubt that Mr. Major's won on the clapometer this week. Loyalty, unity, all that usual bromide, because she's been flushed out. Mr. Major's, I hesitate to say, seen her off where Mrs. Thatcher's concerned, but done well.
So his leadership is intact. We were all fevered with speculation that this was going to be the conference that would test that. But
yes, certainly his short-term leadership is secure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there will be a leadership challenge this autumn. There's still the danger period of the European elections next year. And I think, as Michael says, the Thatcher factor has worked to his advantage, because he will now get a vote of confidence, a rallying from the party activists here, in the knowledge that his predecessor has said he wasn't up to the job, and she's cast doubt on his qualities. These people will say, no, we want you as leader, and I think that's very important for him. And I think the whole effect of the conference would have been destroyed had the book come out after we'd seen a show of loyalty. It would have all started running again.
It would unravel the whole thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah. OK, well, no leadership bids, it's official, but all those speeches on the platform today, to what degree were those people positioning themselves for some future leadership battle?
I think all sorts of them were. Kenneth Clarke has been positioning himself, Michael Howard positioned himself. David Hunt was one of the most disappointing speeches of all, because there was somebody we all thought was a left-winger trying to be a right-winger, a pro-European trying to be anti-Thatcher trying to be pro, and it was a pretty demeaning spectacle. But I think that long term, John Major's still in serious trouble. And once we get back to Parliament, the MPs who have been keeping quiet here will start to flex the muscles again, and that 17-strong majority will start to hurt again.
It's interesting because there was a sense that with everybody stressing that unity was the watchword, it began to look like protesting too much, and he was perhaps being over-cosseted, overprotected. But you think that effect's worn off, and he is actually looking strong in his own sense rather than strengthened by his lieutenants?
Well, he can do harm to himself this afternoon. He's going to improvise this speech. You see, he's not going to take those dreadful teleprompter machines which people use because it gets between him and the public. He's quite right about that. It kills speeches. Ken Clarke's speech this week was, to some degree, badly damaged by the fact that he read off these retro things rather than went directly to his audience. Major's going to take a chance. It's a big chance, and if it works, it'll be fine. But Mr. Major is not a large audience man. They've tried to shrink this hall. They've built the platform out, and they've built a funny old balcony out to make it smaller, but he's a small audience person. He's very good in groups of 10.
But this is a small audience,
yes,
sure. I mean,
but it's not just the cabinet that have been rallying around him. I mean, the message that's come from the conference floor today is one of support for him. And we were primed up to expect a big grassroots revolt on VAT and over taxation.
Well, and we were hoping
that was the Daily Telegraph, George. It wasn't us.
And we didn't have it, and they have come forward.
They never were going to have it.
Are you disappointed?
No.
Are you disappointed? I mean,
No,
I'm not disappointed because they've had a very good story with the, the leadership crisis and Thatcher. But I mean, they've said it, and if you look back at certainly last year's conference, there was a rebellion over Europe. We haven't had that here.
I said last week in Brighton that we were all getting probably too excited because the instinct for unity at the Tory party is still pretty strong. Thatcher played into the Major's hands, and yesterday that was a very effective little operation on the platform when they brought her on to what was a minority applause and then got Major onto sustained applause. I think her day's gone, and he's now got to try and start to move out of her shadow.
Final word.
Norman Lamont said in his resignation speech, they're in office, not in power. But the way they suppressed the debate on VAT and the anger was an instance of a party which was still interested in power. They certainly flicked Mr. Lamont aside here this week.
I'm scared of talking about the real issues that are worrying people.
Well, they're now about to do a bid for funds, a financial appeal we are not allowed to broadcast. Therefore, we shall go outside. There are actually people outside the hall, believe it or not, and Hugh is with them.
Sheena, a lot has been said, a lot has been written about what the party actually wants and expects in John Major's big speech this afternoon. Let's talk to some of the people who count, the party members themselves. Michael Normington, isn't it a joke to talk about a united party when we know you're concerned about Europe, we know you're concerned about VAT and a host of other issues?
I don't think that's a problem at all. We've seen throughout the week the party uniting behind John Major. This afternoon, following his speech, I hope that unification will be complete. I want him to re-emphasise that we are a party of low tax and low public spending. We've had an acknowledgement already this week that local government matters, and it's about time that that was taken on board, so I hope he'll emphasise that. And above all, that we are united going into the European elections. We have a first-rate group of candidates, many of whom have spoken here, and I hope that he will give us full help to get these people elected next year.
John Bercow, you're not a Major fan, are you? You'd like Mrs Thatcher to be there today giving the leader's speech.
Certainly not. No, John Major enjoys the virtually unanimous support of the Conservative Party. I see no indication that that will change, despite the favourite sport of journalists to try to create disunity where it doesn't exist. Our priority, I think, and I hope the Prime Minister's today, is to reclaim the territory which belongs to the Conservative Party. That is what the conference wants, expects John Major to do, and I'm confident
to jump to the right, you mean?
I don't think it's a question of right and left. I think it's a question of maintaining our commitments to the electorate, reining back public expenditure, expanding scope of individual freedom, keeping taxes down, lowering public borrowing, getting tough on criminals, helping those who need help, but waging war on the fraudsters who are stealing from the public purse. Europe is last year's issue. It isn't something with which this conference is preoccupied, despite the best efforts of good journalists like you to ensure otherwise.
Martin Woodruff, don't you think that after the complaints we heard in this morning's debate about party organisation, it's quite clear that out there the grassroots are worried about the state of finance, they're worried about the state of morale, and this morning's debate would suggest that they're not very happy at the end of the week?
I think it indicates there's a lot of energy amongst the grassroots to get out there and to make this party successful. And I think, as John was saying, that what we'll see this afternoon is Mr Major focusing on the domestic agenda, addressing the issues that matter to the people of this country, particularly on crime, particularly on economy. We are going to keep the economic recovery going, we're going to sustain that recovery. We've seen inflation at the lowest level for decades now. now and interest rates. And I think we're going to see that continue. And I think Major is going to talk about crime. And what's more, I think he's going to talk about it in his own style this afternoon. We've heard that he's going to do the speech largely off the cuff with notes. And I think he's best at that. We saw in the election how he could actually talk to the people. And he's going to be not only addressing the conference hall today, but the country at large. And I think he's going to be very, very effective in that.
Sarah Whitehurst, isn't it a bit of a cheek for you as a party to start talking about law and order after 14 years in power? You haven't done much about it, have you?
Well, I think you've only got to listen to Michael Howard's speech on Wednesday to see where this party's going in terms of law and order. I won't quote all the statistics. We all know how many more policemen there are on the beat, how many more special constables, and so on. We're reducing bureaucracy in the police force, and there's no doubt at all, if you compare our debate on law and order this week with that of the Labour Party, that we are the party that knows where it's going there. I think this has been the most happy and harmonious week. I think John Major can pick up the themes that have been so popular here, take them to the country this afternoon, and we can take them back to fight the local elections next year. And law and order is very much at the top of our agenda, although it always has been, never more today than ever before.
Well, John Saunders, you were nodding there at the mention of a happy and harmonious week. In your speech this morning, a very powerful speech, you made it quite plain that the party at Westminster wasn't united, and you weren't happy about that.
Absolutely not. I felt that it was time that somebody like me as a constituency chairman should really say, to coin my phrase, that I was fed up to the back teeth with a small nucleus of so-called Conservative members of Parliament, not who rebel on just one issue like Maastricht, but there are a small band who month after month after month vote for some extraordinary reason against the Prime Minister. And just to say, it is a totally different situation from when Baroness Thatcher had a 144 majority in '83. John Major cannot afford a small nucleus like that, and I hope he will make it very clear that he won't stand for it in the best parliamentary language this afternoon.
Well, in that case, it's difficult for him, isn't it? He depends on their votes. How on earth can he go and stick the boot in if he wasn't to vote for him next week?
Well, I hope it's a situation where if enough ministers, including the Prime Minister and other MPs and the grassroots, like all of us around here, really say exactly what we think, hopefully they might get the message.
Jacqueline Foster, there's some talk that he will start saying things about a permissive society in the 60s, and that's at the root of a lot of problems for today. What on earth's been going on since then? Isn't it a bit of an outdated message?
I think society has changed since the 60s. I spend a lot of time abroad with my job, and I don't think it's just in the United Kingdom, it's throughout Europe too. And we're all having to learn the lesson the hard way. I think I took part in the law and order debate earlier in the week, and one of my main points really was juvenile crime. We've gone on to a sort of pinko leftism, all of us, over the last 2 decades. And of course there was the move away from capital punishment, corporal punishment, which I wholly disagree with. I think they should have been retained in moderation. However, having said that, we need the deterrence back. The people of this country are entitled to be safe. We didn't fight 2 world wars so people couldn't sleep in their beds and feel unsafe in the streets. And I think that's the way we've got to be. It's tough, it's the grassroots. The people of this country want tough action, and criminals and thieves and vandals and murderers locked away. We don't want them on the streets.
John Saunders, is that going to be the main message, do you think, as far as vote catching is concerned?
If we put it down to that level, I suppose it will be. Yes, law and order at the moment is, I think, the main worry of people that we all meet on the doorstep. Yes, I think it could well be, along with all the other matters of state that he'll address.
John Bergen?
I don't think it's a question of vote catching. Somebody made the point in one of the debates this morning that the Conservative Party doesn't first and foremost consist to win elections. It does exist to do what is right, on the strength of which it can be sure that it will win elections. And that is an important distinction. It's not a needle on a pin, so to speak, or a pin on a needle. It's an important distinction. I think that there is a need for loyalty, and I think there is a recognition that that requires collective self-discipline in the parliamentary party. But I think it's also important to understand that it isn't always best achieved. In fact, it's rarely best achieved by abusing people who have different views. There's an obligation on MPs elected with constituent support and their local associations to support the government whenever they can, which should mean almost always. But I think there is an obligation on those at the top of the party to ensure that their language is temperate and that they seek to bring people on board by persuasion and not by abuse.
We don't want barmies and bastards, is what you're trying to say.
I'm not saying that that is the particular example. I think that there is a general recognition that we need to talk to each other as though we are part of the same party, with the same agenda, with the same ambition, and with the determination that we will win next time. There's been a real start on that process this week at this party conference. The task now is to ensure that the government goes on to pursue the policies which it has eloquently promised the party at its conference this week.
Martin Woodruff, do you think it's unfortunate that we've had all the headlines about the alleged leak from Mrs. Thatcher, Lady Thatcher's memoirs? Hasn't that been a slight distraction for John Major?
I think that's the stuff of newspapers, really, isn't it, and particularly the Mirror. But I think on the point of loyalty and on the point of Europe, although it is last year's issue, we saw this year Christopher Prout talking about Europe and getting unanimous support from the Hall for his stance that we need to have Conservative MEPs in there when it comes to the European elections next year. And I think that's critical. And I think what's also interesting is how Europe is now following the British agenda, an agenda set by Douglas Hurd and John Major, a pragmatic agenda. And I think that actually indicates that the Tory party and this country are leading very effectively on that issue.
So on which manifesto do you fight those elections? David Hunt of 3 months ago or David Hunt of a few days ago? Totally different men, apparently.
I think we fight it on the Conservative manifesto, which will be a manifesto. So they talked about it, a wider Europe, a pragmatic Europe, all of the things that we want to see.
Sarah Whiters, isn't there a double message on Europe? We've seen this week a swing to the right in terms of rhetoric. People like David Hunt, fully paid up members of the left wing, no doubt about that, making some rather anti-European noises. He wouldn't have made it a few months ago. Why is he doing that?
All journalists this week have talked about a swing to the right. There's no such thing as a swing to the right. Why is what?
Why do you think we're talking about a swing to the right?
Well, because you are picking up themes here. All we've seen this week is Michael Howard putting an agenda on law and order. We've seen Peter Lilly setting out his stall on the DSS. We've seen George Young talking about housing and our policy there. That's not a swing to the right. That's the Conservative cabinet picking up the themes that matter to the people of this country. And there's more to come. There is good news on the economy. Of course there'll be tough decisions to be made. You might call that a swing to the right when we have to start thinking in the budget about public spending cuts. We call that sound common sense and good management of this country. It's not a question of swings to the right or the left. It's a question of us being here, discussing the best way forward, listening to the cabinet, looking forward to listening to the Prime Minister and going ahead to do what we believe is right.
Michael Normington, if there's one thing in this speech that you want to hear, what is that?
Europe, I think, is the important thing now, and we need to press on full ahead as a united party on a manifesto agreeable to everyone to fight next year's European elections. The whole future of this country could depend on it. We know that following the ratification of the Maastricht Treaty, there will be legislation coming from the European Parliament. I want it to be right-of-centre legislation rather than left-of-centre legislation. So it's all to play for, and we really have to emphasise to people how important it is that they go out next year and that they vote Conservative.
It's putting Douglas Hurd in an impossible position if you're demanding right-wing perspectives on Europe, isn't it?
No, I don't think it is. The Conservative Party is a broad church, and I don't see that there's any problem with the views that have been expressed this week. We want the best deal that we can for Britain out of Europe, and I think that the only way we will get that is with the Conservative Party stand on the issue.
Let me ask you, Mr. Normington, one thing very briefly about party finances. Obviously, there is a problem with the overall deficit. You have been campaigning for more accountability at Central Office. Are you happy that that is developing as you'd like it to develop?
Well, it's certainly developing, but it's not developing on the floor of the conference. The matter wasn't really discussed today. And yet last night at a fringe meeting, there were in excess of 100 constituency representatives seeking to make Conservative Central Office democratically accountable to the constituency associations. We are in a mess financially. I hope that steps are now being taken to cure that. But until these people who are entrusted with the stewardship of the funds and the running of Conservative Central Office are made democratically accountable to the constituency associations, then I don't really think that the situation has changed. And obviously we will continue to press for that.
John Berger, how can John Major get up onto that stage and convince people that they need to go out and raise funds? They haven't been doing so for the last few years. What on earth can you do today to change matters?
Oh, I think there's every prospect that we can do just that. John Major was outstandingly successful in the run-up to the general election, in winning that election, in setting out his stall, convincing the British people. There's no reason to suppose that he can't do the same again. People want him to do so here. We now have got away from the drift and listlessness of the last year and of the divisions over Maastricht. And people like Norman Tebbit, who have considerable support in the party but have had their differences with the Prime Minister, have been saying that themselves this week, that there is real scope for a common agenda on Europe and for a common commitment at home to prudent finance, to lower spending as well, which Michael Portillo and Ken Clarke intend to deliver, and to the sort of policies which Michael Howard and Peter Lilly have promised. That is a unity agenda. It's an agenda for a united Conservative Party and for electoral success both next year and at the general general election. I'm confident that's what's going to happen.
Very quickly from each of you, one theme that you want to be expressed clearly in this speech. Just one theme.
To reiterate the points made by Michael Howard on law and order this one.
2 words, party loyalty.
Sound economic policies.
Law and order in the economy.
Sound finance, getting tough on criminals, and looking after victims.
That's 3 themes.
Go back to the unity on Europe for the elections next year.
Thank you all very much. Back to you, Sheena.
Thank you. In the hall, there's a warm-up video going on. Up here on the balcony, I'm joined by the BBC's political editor emeritus, John Cole. Now, the speech, does he have his own vision? Must he have his own vision?
I think from advanced reports of what the Prime Minister is going to say, that he's probably going back to a fairly traditional vision, which frankly appeals to many of the things that have stirred this conference towards the week. I mean, reports that he is going to tackle the mistakes as he sees it that were made in the 60s about attitudes to the family, attitudes to crime, to education, to tar blocks and housing and all that do appear to be confirmed from what we have heard. And that, of course, will appeal to this conference. Whether it is a vision to carry a party forward is another matter.
Well, is it his own? There are those who say he has been hijacked by the right. Would that be your view?
I think that is too simple, because I think he will assert his Europeanism and say that he has paid some price in terms of personal popularity, as indeed he has, by resisting some of the anti-European instincts of a large section of his party. So he knows that British business, which supports this party after all by and large, believes that Britain's future is in Europe. He also believes that, and I think he's going to stand firm on that.
Now, if he does that, he's mustering arms for yet another battle, is he not? A battle coming up between the Europhiles and the Eurosceptics.
Yes, I think the European battle is endemic in the Conservative Party now, as it is in the Labour Party as well. There's not so much legislation, of course, required in the coming session, but I think we're going to have more nasty votes in the House of Commons.
John Cole, we'll see what he says shortly. Thank you very much indeed. Vivian?
Why we won. And they all came up with the same answer. We won because of John Major's leadership, John Major's courage,
All the fun of the fair here in the conference hall. They are being showed a video which gives them a view of this conference as the party would like to present it to itself. On a huge video screen, they're being shown a warm-up act which consists of their compilation of the week they've just seen, to make quite certain they understand exactly what to make of it. Sir Norman Fowler, then, who summed up in reality this morning, is summing up on the giant video screen behind them as well.
And what I say to our critics is this: you, Prime Minister, have proved them wrong before. You have forced them to...
They've had songs, they've waved flags, they've had jokes, and they're waiting now, with this political warm-up act, for the Prime Minister to arrive to music. And to Hugh. And to wild acclaim, the Prime Minister greets his party. The election music plays, balloons fill the air, banners wave to greet him. One leader, one nation, one John Major to speak to his party at this conference's end. Beneath him, the Union Jack that he wished to have on the platform. And the cabinet all applaud before he's uttered a single word. This whole week has been an appeal for unity, with his name and unity repeated again and again and again. This speech will describe on whose terms that unity has been gained. We were told only yesterday that any enemy of Mr. Major was an enemy of the party.
Welcome, Prime Minister and Norma. We're delighted to have you with us at our conference. Before asking you to address us, we all know your enthusiasm for cricket, and I would like us to take a short look at your batting average. In India, in January, batting for Britain, billions of pounds worth of trade brought back. A good opener, a good 6. The rate of inflation halved, then halved again. Its lowest in a generation. Another 6? Yes. Then, when wages awards dropped below the inflation rate, you broke the wage price spiral. Unheard of. Never been done before. I think that's worthy of a 6 too, Prime Minister. More recently in Japan, £1 billion worth of trade. Again, and more to come. Definitely another smash hit for 6. Now, winning the last election against all odds, with a little help from your friends, that surely must be the best 6 of all time. But for your final 6 in this over, I want to tell you a story. You inherited the shooting part of the Gulf War, and after seeing us through, insisted that to avoid genocide, there must be a safe haven for the Kurds. I understand, I have it on good authority, that once Sir Humphrey, when told of your intentions, said, "He can't possibly do that. It's part of the internal affairs of a sovereign state. You must get in there and stop him." They said, "Sir, we can't. He's already in there and doing it." I think we could say that was a real winning stroke. A brilliant over, a brilliant captain, a brilliant major, a man of honor, decision, and vision, a leader, ladies and gentlemen, our leader and Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
It's always a good idea to find out if these are on. Madam President, as I walked through the Winter Gardens during conference week, I passed the bookstores. And what do I see? I see memoirs. Memoirs to the left of me, memoirs to the right of me, memoirs in front of me, volley, volley, and thunder. Madam President, let me say right away, I'm not about to write my memoirs, not for a long time. There's a job to be done, a job of service to this nation, and I believe in service. There's a job to be done, a job I was elected to do, and I propose to go on doing it. Madam President, there's one aspect of the memoirs that I may write in future that you needn't wait for. I can tell you now, straight away, precisely what I think of my cabinet. Do you think any of them look worried? Apprehensive? Touch concerned? They needn't be. They're a first-class team. They're steady under fire. They're united, and they're serving Britain superbly. And isn't it good to see Michael back? Did you see those exercises? I dare say they're going to enliven quite a few cabinet meetings in the future. Madam President, I've been coming to this conference on and off for about 30 years. It's a very great event in the political calendar, but it's something else as well. It's a family gathering. And like all families, from time to time, we have our squabbles. So today, before I turn to other matters, I want to say something to you specifically as leader of the Conservative Party. Our party has served our country in government more often and better than any other democratic political party in the world. We've done so because we're the broadest-based political party this country has ever seen. Our support comes from all classes, all income groups, and all parts of the United Kingdom. Madam President, I know our party. It can bear many things: unpopularity, deep controversy, setbacks. We've seen it all before. But there's one thing that demoralizes our workers and that breaks apart our support in the country, and that is disunity. We've always known where it leads, and so, in this private gathering we have today, we might as well state it plainly. Disunity leads to opposition. Not just opposition in Westminster, but in the European Parliament and in town halls and county halls up and down this country. Of course, we won't agree on every single aspect of policy. No one expects that. We're a democratic party with a whole range of lively ideas. But I think you'll agree with me upon this. People look to us for common sense and for competence. And we have a responsibility to you and to the people who put us in Parliament to show those qualities day after day. And that means we have to have our agreements in public and our disagreements in private. And if agreement is impossible, and sometimes on great issues it is difficult, if not impossible, then I believe I have the right, as leader of this party, to hear of that disagreement in private and not on television in interviews outside the House of Commons. Madam President, the last year has shown how hard every part of our party can fight for what it believes in. Let the next year show that we can channel all that energy together in a common effort against our opponents and for the policies we care about. This week, an unusual week. This week we've had two conferences for the price of one. First, there's the one we've been at. And then there's the one we've read about. You know, I'm not absolutely sure that everyone's caught up completely with the current mood of our party. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I want to hear the answers loud and clear so that no one can doubt where you stand. They're very simple questions and very straightforward. Aren't you fed up with people running our country down? Aren't you fed up with people writing our party off? When people ask, will the Conservatives win next time, what do you say? I didn't quite catch that. Yes, yes and yes again. And you don't need shorthand to get that down. You see, Madam President, this is a family gathering, just as I said. But now I want to reach out a little further, to speak not just to you, but to those outside this hall who may be listening. I want to share some thoughts with you and see if they strike a chord with your own experience. I think that many people, particularly those of you who are older, see things around you in the streets and on your television screens which are profoundly disturbing. We live in a world that sometimes seems to be changing too fast for comfort, old certainties crumbling, traditional values falling away. People are bewildered. Week after week, month after month, they see attacks on the very pillars of our society: the church, the law, even the monarchy, as if 41 years of dedicated service was not enough. And people ask, where's it going? Why has it happened? And above all, how can we stop it? Let me tell you what I believe. For 2 generations, too many people have been belittling the things that made this country. We've allowed things to happen that we should never have tolerated. We have listened too often and too long to people whose ideas are light years away from common sense. In housing, in the 50s and 60s, we pulled down the terraces, destroyed whole communities and replaced them with tower blocks, and we built walkways that have become rat runs for muggers. That was the fashionable opinion. Fashionable, but wrong. In our schools, we did away with traditional subjects, grammar, spelling, tables, and also with the old ways of teaching them. Fashionable, but wrong. Some said the family was out of date. Far better rely on the council and social workers than family and friends. I passionately believe that was wrong. Others told us that every criminal needed treatment, not punishment. Criminal behavior was society's fault, not the individual's. Fashionable, but wrong, wrong, wrong. Madam President, on all these things, received opinion with the wisdom of hindsight, received opinion was wrong. And now, we must have the courage to stand up and say so, and I believe that millions and millions of people are longing to hear it. You know, the truth is, much as things have changed on the surface, underneath, we're still the same people. The old values, neighbourliness, decency, courtesy, they're still alive. They're still the best of Britain. They haven't changed. And yet somehow people feel embarrassed by them. Madam President, we shouldn't be. It is time to return to those old core values. Time to get back to basics, to self-discipline and respect for the law, to consideration for others, to accepting responsibility for yourself and your family and not shuffling off on other people and the state. Madam President, I believe that what this country needs is not less conservatism, it's more conservatism of the traditional kind that made us join this party. This week we made a start. Now we must see it through. It's time for this party to return to its roots. Madam President, our economic roots are clear. We're the party of Adam Smith, not John Smith. And Adam Smith was the apostle of free markets. And that is why we regard the present world trade talks as so important. At meeting after meeting, we have battled to keep those trade talks alive against difficulty after difficulty. Because nothing will do more for growth, nothing will do more for jobs, nothing will do more for confidence in our future than agreement in those trade talks. But if other governments don't play their part, if they hold back, if they won't face up to their domestic difficulties, then those talks could collapse. And the dangers of that happening are devastating. They could unlock protectionism, poverty, and unemployment on a scale that we have not seen since the 1930s. A great deal is at stake. And because a great deal is at stake, I don't believe we ought to be mealy-mouthed about the dangers. Today on this issue is not a time for holding back. So let me say to some of our European colleagues, you're playing with fire, or to put it more bluntly, get your tractors off our lawn. People accuse us. People accuse us of being the business party. Well, you bet we are. We're for small business and we're for large business. We're for more business, not less business. When business booms, Britain booms. So we're for private enterprise and we're proud of it. Over the last 3 years, the whole country has sweated and slogged and suffered to turn this economy round. Now steadily it's happening. Recovery is underway. That's the message from British business. The economy is growing. You may not see it yet, but it clearly is growing, and it will show. And as the economy grows, the family budget will follow, so people have every reason to begin to start feeling better again. Inflation's down, interest rates are down, exports are up, productivity's up, retail sales are up, manufacturing output is up, and the number of people in work is up. Madam President, it's the opportunity cocktail we've been wanting for years, and it gives this country a head start on prosperity for the rest of this decade. So let's try and build up that confidence instead of forever seeing it knocked down. Why don't we try something different? Why don't we tell people about Britain's successes? And let me tell you about them in the strictest confidence. So they're sure to leak out. Who says we can't make things in this country? Manufacturing industry is one of our great national assets. Three weeks ago, sometimes it seems longer, 3 weeks ago I was in Japan, the industrial wonder of the world. And there with me were British manufacturers selling solutions to problems that Japan hadn't solved. Successful British firms, international leaders in their own fields, firms at the leading edge of technology, selling successfully to the world technology leader. 2 days later, I was in Malaysia, and we came back with £1 billion worth of orders for British companies. They didn't buy British to do our companies a favour. They did it because we made what they wanted, and we made it better in this country than anyone else in the world. "14 years ago, Britain was going nowhere. Now it's going everywhere and selling everywhere. We're making goods, making profits, making waves right across the world. But despite that, despite the growth we've had there and the growth to come there, I must warn you, it's still going to be tough. And everyone in business here today, or everyone who listens to what I say today, knows how hard they have to compete. At present, Europe, our biggest market, is stuck deep in recession. It's held back by social costs it can't afford. It's losing markets to Japan and to America and to the Pacific Basin. And that, Madam President, that amongst other reasons, is why I refuse to accept the social chapter. It's not a chapter of rights, it's a charter for unemployment, and we don't want it here. What we do want is more of our best brains going into manufacturing industry. Let's see them give politics, the city, journalism a miss, and go into manufacturing industry where their skills can be so badly needed. And let's see our great manufacturing centres humming with activity as we move towards the millennium. Let's turn British inventions into British industries, British factories and British jobs. Let them make pounds for us, not dollars, marks and yen for other people. Ministers are told whenever they go abroad, part of your job these days is to open the door for British business. We're backing exports with cheaper credit, more government muscle and a new breed of diplomat, people who know as much about exports as they do about etiquette. At home, we're taking the ridiculous burden of red tape off business and off citizen alike. And I can tell you, in the next session of Parliament, there will be a big deregulation bill to show how seriously we take that. Here's a good old British maxim you could all remember. If the price is right and the goods are good enough, then sell abroad and buy at home. That's the way to make sure that British industry continues to boom. But there are other things we need to do for industry. Industry isn't asking us for handouts and special help. It's asking us as the government to play our part in creating the right economic environment for industry to let loose its own energies and compete on a level basis with the rest of the world. So here, Madam President, is another ambitious target for our country. Not months, but years and years and years of sustained growth without the curse of inflation. That is at the heart of our economic policy for the 90s. It's a prize for which British governments have struggled for 30-odd years, and yet now it's within reach, and we are not going to throw it away. Just remember, only 3 years ago, inflation was over 10%. Now it's under 2%, and it must be kept low. Inflation is in check, but it's never in checkmate. Back in the 70s, soaring prices destroyed savings. We all remember that. We all want to make sure it never happens again. But to do that, to make sure it never happens again and destroys businesses and livelihoods and savings, sometimes we may have to hold back our ambitions for tax and spending. Madam President, let me get one thing entirely clear. Our views on tax are different from those of the other parties. What the Conservative Party is aiming for is a government that lives within its income and without your income. Other parties tax because they want to. We tax only because we have to. So come rain or shine, taxes will always be lower under us than any other kind of government. But success has another vital ingredient: getting public finances back under control. At the moment, largely because of the recession, with the great collapse in income that created, we have a huge gap between what Britain spends and the tax we take in. We have to narrow that gap. It is true, government has spent more over the last 2 years. We had to help the weak and protect the vulnerable through the recession. And that, Madam President, is an important part of conservatism as well. But now Britain's recovering, so we have to cut the deficit. We all agree on that. But it's no good agreeing on the principle unless you take the action, and it's no use people urging us to take the action unless they are prepared to back us when we have taken it, for it may often be difficult. There are tough choices ahead, and we must make them, and we will make them, because it is in the interests of our country to make them, and we have that responsibility. Of course, people's opinions will differ. Some say tax more, some say tax less, some say spend more, some say spend less, but stay out of my backyard. All that's perfectly okay for the opposition, but it won't do for the government party. We can't have a lobby against every difficult decision. Decisions are what government is for, and we have to take them. So once the debate is over, once Ken Clarke has announced our budget proposals, we Conservatives must work together and take that message to every single part of the country. But there is one thing I can tell you that you can take with it. High income tax is no part of this party's programme. It never has been, and as far as I'm concerned, it never will be. Madam President, high on every Conservative list is raising standards in our schools. That's why John Patton's first concern is with what parents think and what our children need. There are tens of thousands of excellent teachers up and down the country, and I'm proud to pay tribute to all they do on behalf of our children. But there is bad teaching as well, and many parents and many pupils know that only too well. Our children must be taught what they need to know. That's why we need a national curriculum. It's why we need national testing, not just for the sake of it, but to find out what our children have learnt and what they have failed to learn. And when we know what they've failed to learn, we can put it right. But without those testing, we fail those children because we never learn what they haven't understood at an early stage in their school careers. The principle of tests is not negotiable. We don't need reams and reams of complex papers that take hours for teachers to handle. What we do need is those simple pencil and paper tests that this party has always asked for, and that is what John Patton is going to deliver for us. Because unless we teach a child to read, to write, and to add up, then we hobble that child for the rest of his life. Take John Prescott. For the audience at Brighton last week, his speech was a religious experience, mainly because it passeth all understanding. But push him to one side. I saw a letter recently from over 500 university teachers of English. And they say in their letter that it's disastrous and harmful to teach standard English, great literature, and Shakespeare in our schools. Apparently, teaching Shakespeare threatens to reduce a living language to a dead one. They say, and believe it or not, this is a quote. They say, it would do serious damage to the moral and social development of our children and to the cultural life of society as a whole, and all who are concerned with such matters should oppose in the strongest possible terms. What claptrap! Well, I'll answer them in words perhaps they might approve of. Me and my party ain't gonna take what them on the left says is okay, right? Madam President, over the past few months, in meetings with party workers, many of them I think will be here today, I've made it clear in private that the attack on crime would be the centrepiece of next year's legislation. On Wednesday, after one of the best conference debates I have ever heard, Michael Howard delivered the first instalment. Lord Archer, if I may call him that, made it clear how much we'll have the support of the whole country in that programme. But don't let's pretend that we've been idle over the last 14 years. We haven't. We've increased sentences, built more prisons, spent more, recruited more police, and those police have served us magnificently. And no other party would have done as much. But we know now it was not enough. In many parts of the country, crime figures have risen remorselessly. Crimes once confined to the cities have spread out into the rural areas, bringing alarm where alarm was never before. And that is the reason for our new approach. We have tried being understanding. We have tried persuasion. Madam President, it hasn't worked. I know criminals are a problem in a cell, but they're much more of a problem on the street. And policy must be dictated by the needs of justice, not by the number of prison places we happen to have available on any given day. If someone belongs in prison, then that is where they should be. And that's why we're building more prisons. Better the guilty behind bars than the innocent penned in at home. Let me tell you how I see things. We need tougher rules on bail and no bail for the worst offenders. An end to the right to silence, as Michael Howard announced earlier this week. And more information for the police from DNA testing. We're going to use science to help catch the criminal and not let silence protect the criminal. Here too, it's back to basics. For some, punishment seems to be a dirty word. Well, you'll find it in my dictionary, and I strongly suspect that it's in yours. Some time ago, I said we should condemn a little more and understand a little less. And I meant that for this reason. If we let young people at an early age think crime is a normal part of growing up, if we let them off with a caution, and a caution, it is small wonder if they feel there is no peer pressure turning them to law and order and they turn to bigger crime later. And if we extend those parameters of leniency so far, we betray our children, for we do not give them the values that we expect them to live up to when they become an adult part of our society. There's one other issue in the range of measures that Michael announced in his remarkable speech the other day that didn't find room in it, for there was, even for the Home Secretary, a limited amount of time at this conference. But it's an issue upon which I feel very strongly. And I can tell you today that we plan a big crackdown on the loathsome trade in pornography that offends so many people in this country. There will be new powers of arrest and search, new powers to seize videos and other material, and something I personally particularly support, a new offence to make the possession of child pornography a crime that can lead to imprisonment. Yes, Madam President, it's tough. And so it should be. There's no place in a civilized society for that sort of exploitation of our children. But don't let us delude ourselves. Fighting crime is not just a matter for the police or for the government. We can legislate. We can provide the resources. We can do all that, and the police can perform miracles on the resources they have. But governments can't make people good. That is for parents, for churches, for schools, to every single citizen. Like many people in this hall today, as a boy, I knew people who had nothing, who expected nothing. They didn't commit crime because they did have something. They had values, dignity, pride, respect for their neighbours, and above all, respect for the old. And in the long-term battle against crime, that respect needs building every bit as much as Michael Howard's new prisons. Madam President, let me make it clear beyond a doubt. I simply do not accept that crime can be excused. And under this government, I give you my word, it never will be. Madam President, from the serious to the less serious, our opponents. Our opponents can't string two policies together, but they can cook up a scare. And of course, there's always a ready market for scares. Every day I'm told what I think that I don't think. what I've done that I haven't done, what I'm planning that I'm not planning. Hearing the news day after day is a voyage of discovery for me. Voyage of discovery for me, but very unsettling for many others. Many of them elderly, more of them not very rich, and most of them very worried. So let me offer some reassurance. Not rumour, fact. Next time Labour and the Liberals say we are going to charge for visits to the doctor, you can tell them confidently, no, we're not. Next time they say we are going to charge for stays in hospital, tell them, no, we're not. And when they say we are going to introduce prescription charges for pensioners, you get right out on the doorsteps and tell them, no, we're not. They say we're going to force older people to go to the bank, not the post office, to collect their pensions. Well, really. I have 500 square miles of Huntingdonshire in my constituency, and heaven knows how many rural post offices. I know their value to local village life. I know their value to the community. I know how much pensioners rely on them, and that's why I promise you they'll be able to go on picking up their pensions at the post office. So go out and knock all that nonsense on the head. And yes, I know the concerns. Nobody could possibly have missed them, the concerns that people have about their fuel bills. They believe that they're going to face massive rises. They aren't. And the most vulnerable fear they're going to be left without compensation. They aren't. Kenneth Clarke made that clear yesterday, and I'm happy to repeat it today. This nation owes a huge debt to its pensioners. It's something this Conservative Party will never forget. So it's our duty to keep our country a place in which they feel both safe and secure. So when you hear people saying this, that, or the other, don't always swallow it wholesale. Remember, in the immortal words of Sporting Life in Porgy and Bess, it ain't necessarily so. Madam President, scares take me, naturally, to the Labour Party. I'm not going to be savage about Labour. I think the people of this country would welcome an end to bad-mouthing between politicians. So as a man damned every Sunday for his moderation, I think I shall stick to my own civil instincts. But that doesn't mean I can't have a bit of fun. Did you hear John Smith's speech last week? He's a good man, is John, but Lord, doesn't he go on about it. He rather reminds me of a Scottish Buddha. The very essence of immobility, with a faint smile of perfect self-contentment upon his face. And the Buddha has watched his shadow chancellor, Gordon Brown, Labour's gift to melancholia. He's watched him run from not sure about taxes to no more taxes to lots and lots more taxes in just 6 weeks. And there's a long time before the next election. And the Buddha said, nothing. The Buddha has let his Northern Ireland spokesman plan a united Ireland. And the Buddha said nothing. The Buddha has let his education spokesman say, stop tests, cover up school results and scrap A-levels. And what did he say? The Buddha said nothing. One hears that the only sign the Buddha ever gives is a slight shake of the head if anyone proposes a new idea. Madam President, we saw something rather remarkable in Brighton last week. They called it a famous victory. Famous victory? I would call it John Smith's political Munich. Here it is, composite, I beg his pardon, composite 55 and 56. Let me read you the victory roll. The trade unions will now only make 70% of policy and choose 1/3 of the leader. Which 1/3 is unclear. Perhaps they don't think it matters. After all, they've long had the bit above the neck. What we have out of last week is a minor reduction in union influence in the Labour Party and the promise of a huge increase in union power in Britain if there were a Labour government. One small step for the Buddha, one giant leap for the Brudders. Whatever the trade unions asked for, they got. And what they asked for was unconditional surrender. Remember what Mr. Smith said. The country needs strong unions today as never before. Madam President, after all we've fought for over the last 14 years, I think this conference would beg to differ with that judgment. Madam President, there's another strange party in British politics. It gives a different answer to the same question in Cornwall or London, in Ryedale or Eastbourne, on Monday or Tuesday. They're against VAT on fuel in the morning and for a carbon tax in the afternoon. But they are consistent about two things. The first of them is tax. They are the other high tax party. Income tax, local income tax, carbon tax, regional tax, Scottish tax, Welsh tax, and given half a chance, Euro tax as well. If they thought it'd raise money, they'd produce revenue from sin tax and tin tax. And the second thing they're consistent about is federalism. Centralism in Europe. The Liberal Party is a federal party. Don't take my word for it. This is their conference agenda. The autumn conference, it says, the autumn conference of the Federal Party. That is the Liberals in their own words. And look what they called for in this conference for a federal Europe. Turn to page 99. Though I would not recommend to you pages 1 to 98. This is what they called for on page 99. They called for sensible application of the social protocol. And they had an amendment. Delete sensible was the amendment. I agree. Sensible stands out like a sore thumb in every Liberal conference. But their leaders are fanatics for federalism. They have been out of government so long they've forgotten how to take decisions. The only decision they can take is that they want someone else to take the decisions for us in this country. Next June, we will have European elections in Britain. let me say to all our candidates who are present and everyone here who will work in that campaign, that will be a national campaign. We are going to fight those elections on a clear and distinct British Conservative manifesto for the future of Europe. Madam President, I have risked and sacrificed more than most for what I passionately believe in: a strong Britain playing a leading role in a strong and growing Europe, a wider Europe, a free trade Europe, a less intrusive Europe, our vision of an independent, confident Britain giving leadership with our partners in the European community. And in our elections in this country next year, we will be the only mainstream party that is not prepared to move towards a centralised Europe and take that message to every doorstep in the country. And tell them this too. Tell them that any vote against us for whatever party, Labour, Liberal, makes no difference. Any vote against us for whatever party would be seen in every capital in the community as a signal that the British people want a centralised Europe. We know they don't. You know they don't. They know they don't. We must make sure the people of Britain vote to show the rest of Europe that we don't. The Liberal leader says, rather nervously I thought, that the guns are turning on him. Too right they are, and not before time. Let the Liberals loose, and the prospect of a federal Europe could be a reality again. In this country, they are federalism's fifth column. Away with them next June in the elections. Madam President, before I leave the Liberal leader, I want to say a word about his posturing on Bosnia. I find it distasteful. No words suffice for the sheer dreadfulness of Bosnia. The violence that has torn apart what used to be Yugoslavia has deep and bloody roots. They go back to the Middle Ages and beyond. People there have suffered great wrongs and unimaginable cruelties. We have given, as we always give, help, food, medicine, technical aid. We have sent British troops with humanitarian aid, the first country to do so. And those troops have saved literally hundreds of thousands of lives, men, women, children, who would now be dead from cold and starvation, are still alive thanks to the activities, the skill, and the bravery of those troops we sent to Bosnia. Madam President, right at the start of this war, I said that I was not prepared to put British troops into combat to hold the various sides apart. It's my responsibility as the Queen's First Minister, to advise when soldiers should be sent to fight and to risk being killed. It's all very well to call from the sidelines for a huge military commitment to Bosnia. But I listen with respect to the views of the senior professional soldiers and airmen. They know the depth of the problem. They know what we would be asking their men to do. They know that while the threat of airstrikes is a good deterrent, you cannot finally settle a guerrilla war by bombing. They know that. We saw it in Iraq after the biggest armada of bombing for week after week after week. It was not until we sent in ground troops that Saddam Hussein finally lost. And those senior servicemen warned me against trying to separate three sides that hate each other in a cruel civil war in some of the wildest hill and forest country in Europe. There is another form of intervention which we may have to contemplate. Intervention not to impose a settlement on parties at war, but to help implement a negotiated peace. Right now, alas, the peace prospects are thin and speculative. Too speculative to risk the life of a private in the Cheshires or the Prince of Wales' own. The negotiators will go on trying. I earnestly hope they will succeed. But I shall not ask a British private to risk leaving his mother without a son and his wife without a husband unless there is a real settlement. Unless there is a real will by the peoples of Bosnia to stop fighting, not some ploy to suck outsiders in and then start the war again. I have never been in doubt about Bosnia. Though one cannot always speak one's mind plainly, I have understood that to intervene is to risk an intolerable number of British dead. A war is easily started. The boys are always going to be back for Christmas. But wars, particularly wars in the Balkans, have other ideas. So let me make it clear. I leave the talk of a quick away day outing for the commandos with everything sorted out in a couple of weeks to the commentators and to the royal corps of columnists. Yugoslavia is tragedy. I consider all the options, but I must think first of the lives of British soldiers. And I will not put them at risk for the sake of talking big and striking attitudes. I will not rush into war. Emotion says yes. Logic says no. I say no. Madam President, an unstable Yugoslavia is one thing. An unstable Russia would be quite another. So let me say a few words about the events of the past week. We should be under no illusions about the real motives of the rebels in the Russian parliament. They were out for blood, the blood of Democrats and reformers. And had they won, the consequences for Russia and for the rest of the world would not have borne thinking about. Yesterday morning, Boris Yeltsin told me that the courts would now deal with his opponents. Madam President, that is not how they wanted to deal with him. The Russian people have twice voted for President Yeltsin and for reform. Now he plans further elections, free elections, not rigged communist elections. He invited me yesterday to send British observers to ensure those elections were fair. I agreed and promised that we would certainly do so. Those elections in December will be the surest test that democratic reform remains on track. We backed Boris Yeltsin against the 1991 coup. We were the first to do so. We backed him last weekend, and I promise you this, we shall go on backing reform in Russia in the months ahead. When we speak of the threat of violence, there is one other place that is never far from our minds. Each day this week, while we've been gathered here in Blackpool, thousands of young men and women risk their lives in the army and in the security services in Northern Ireland. They stand in the defence of democracy and of the rule of law. Under a Conservative government, they will continue to have all the support that they need. Northern Ireland is part of our democracy. We are not going to bargain away the people's democratic rights, or any part of them, in order to appease those who seek to rule by bullet or by bomb. To do so would betray the people, and in particular those of every party, many of them brave, who take a part in constitutional politics in Northern Ireland. So no government that I lead will negotiate with those who perpetrate or those who support the use of violence. There is only one message for them to send. We have finished with violence for good. Madam President, we are, and we will remain, the Conservative and Unionist Party. At the heart of our philosophy is an abiding belief in the right of the people of Northern Ireland to determine their own future. Unlike the Labour Party, we are not in the business of securing the breakup of the United Kingdom. For us, the Union and all it means is immensely important. In all parts of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, the Union has the decisive support of those who live there. So I give this assurance to the brave and resilient people of Northern Ireland. For our part, we will always back your democratic wishes. Madam President, before I sit down, I want to congratulate all of you in the hall, all of you who are the backbone and the strength of our party, for your cool, your warmth, and yes, your resilience during a remarkable and, how shall I put it, most diverting week in Blackpool. Throughout the 1980s, the political energy of this country came from the Conservatives. That energy must go on through the 90s, and not only go on, but grow and develop, driven not just by those in government, but by you, who work on our behalf, for our philosophy, for our party, in each and every part of the United Kingdom. And if you feel, as I do, refreshed and recharged by our work in Blackpool this week, then go home and help us restore the fortunes of our party. Through hard work and a passionate belief that what we Conservatives stand for is more true, more deep, more enduring, more in touch with the basic instincts of the nation we love than all the words of all the other political parties rolled together. We stand for self-reliance, for decency and for respect for others, for wages that stay in the pay packet and don't drain away in tax. We stand for money that keeps its value, for a country united around those old, common-sense British values that should never have been pushed aside. The message from this conference is clear and simple. We must go back to basics. We want our children to be taught the best. our public services to give the best, our British industry to be the best. And the Conservative Party will lead the country back to those basics right across the board. Sound money, free trade, traditional teaching, respect for the family and respect for the law. And above all, we will lead a new campaign to defeat the cancer that is crime. Carry out that message. Reach out, not only to those who already think as we do, but to all those with no special party allegiance who care for what we care for and who love this country as we do for the same reasons we do. Do that. The fight goes on. The waverers will return. And yes, a fifth victory will be ours. And one final word. Thank you. Thank you for something that has been quite fantastic. Your loyalty to this party and your loyalty to me.
Flags, balloons, you can even hear them bursting here and there. Mr. Major, the Prime Minister, achieved in this speech at its best, and there are quite a few moments when it was, the rare feat of managing to speak intimately to a huge audience, especially when he introduced his cabinet and said he wasn't writing memoirs yet.
And an appeal to family values. Like all families, he said, we have squabbles, but as a broad-based political party, what family would not? And this family, which is conference, are cheering him. That's a minute on their feet, waving flags, waving hats, holding up posters.
It was a back-to-basics message, as we had come to expect. At the end of the week in which he'd had a bruising time, he set out to slay the Thatcher dragon at the beginning. And of all those asides so famously reported, he began bravely and got away with it, saying, it's always a good idea to find out if the microphones are on. Unquestionably, the best moments in this speech were when he wasn't appearing to read a text, but just taking it and taking the audience with him, inviting them spontaneously to reply, and sometimes they replied without him even having cued it. This is the longest speech he's made as party leader, and it was the best of them. They hold up Winnie. That's high praise indeed at this Conservative Party conference, to compare him to them.
No modesty here. They love the speech this afternoon. They love him. And they've started singing already, for he's a jolly good fellow. he seems to have achieved what at one point this week seemed an impossible task, to unite the different constituencies here at conference, on the platform and in the hall. They'll be here all afternoon. We may not be. So before we leave Blackpool, let me turn to the BBC's political editor, Robin Oakley. It had to be an important speech. How good was it?
It was a good speech. It was delivered with considerable authority, particularly for a man who's been under such fire so openly for his leadership and who's been so dogged by his predecessors' criticisms. I thought Mr. Major had a sharper phraseology today, that he was definitely better without the autocue. What he's done here is to show a great identity with the fears of his audience, to offer them great reassurance. But he wasn't offering them an ideology or any great slogans in the way that Lady Thatcher used to do. He's really been saying, I understand your feelings, society has been changed in a way you don't like, you don't quite understand how it's happened. Well, let's get about turning back, getting back to those core values, basics on law and order, respect for authority. Whether you can build a winning programme on that, and whether he held out to them enough hope that he would be able to change that situation, we'll have to see.
Well, who is they here? We have the conference here in the hall. Now, they seem pretty enthusiastic. Of course, was also talking to the country, but his principal audience was this audience.
It was indeed, and I think the other thing that he did here was a great appeal for unity. He started with one or two quite good jokes about memoirs to the left of him, memoirs to the right of him, memoirs in front of him. And then he warned this party that if they don't show unity, they are going to go down to defeat at the next election.
Well, he was talking specifically to his cabinet, and we see him standing in the thick of them there, and they're all clapping and cheering. But he said, if you're having disagreements, don't have them on television, don't have them outside Westminster, come to me in private. That was as strict a warning as you can give in public.
Yes, he had to appeal for unity here because warfare has broken out between the left and right of the party. And what he was trying to do, he was trying to divert that by saying, well, look, there is a great core of basic values that we share, and to identify those basic values, something that predates Thatcherism or Majorism or any other recent ism, and is basically what conservatism is all about. And he's reminding them they have that common chord. The other thing he was doing here was saying, look, you're asking us to take some tough decisions, to balance the books, to get the economy back in shape. That is going to mean tough decisions, and you can't just pick and choose. You can't take those a la carte. If you want those tough decisions, you've got to give us the support to get them through.
Michael Dobbs, who's been our Sherpa throughout this week, has struggled up from the floor. Congratulations on making it through the scrum. Now, unity was the theme. It looks like unity here, but how long is it going to last? We're back to Westminster in a fortnight.
Well, I think there's a very exceptional feeling out there. There's a sort of electricity which, frankly, we would have been surprised to discover just a week ago. Of course, all unity can be fragile. This seems to me to have the makings of with a few legs on it.
Did it go as well as you expected or better?
Well, again, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, there were some dire predictions for this conference. It has been a celebration, really. They are really enjoying themselves out there, and that is an excellent sign for the future for the Conservative Party.
There's been talk of two conferences throughout this week. The conference that we're showing on television, the conference that's here in the hall. But the one that we're showing on television is also important, Robert Oakley. It's the one of the tea rooms and the gossip outside, is it not?
Yes, and actually I found the representatives here much more ready to accept this week that two conferences were going on. In the past, reporting party conferences, I've had people come up to me and say, what you're reporting is nothing to do with what I see here. This time they're saying, yes, we understand you've got to report that, and by the way, my position on the leadership is this, or my position on the left or right drift of the party is this. And this is a party which has begun to talk about itself in left and right terms in a way we only used to get in the Labour Party a few years ago.
I wonder if Lady Thatcher is watching this scene at the moment, the kind of ovation she got when she was leader. Of course, 3 years ago she got such an ovation, and only a few weeks later she was humiliated and deposed. Perhaps that's an unhappy memory to recall today, but has her ghost, if you like, been laid at this conference?
Well, I think that many people out there would like to say that the ghost hasn't been laid, that there's not a ghost at all, that there is, if you like, a continuing influence, but hopefully an influence for good, because they don't see the great change in the Conservative Party under Thatcher and under Major. They see the underlying values, and indeed the underlying values, the enduring values, has been the theme of this conference, and it seems to have got through.
So in fact, perhaps, Robin Oakley, the mantle has been passed on.
I think there's been a sign this week that the mantle has been passed on. It takes any new leader some time to take over control of their party from the predecessor, particularly all those people who've come in on the wave with the previous leader. There have been signs this week of the personal liking of the representatives here for John Major. Interesting, they started singing for He's a Jolly Good Fellow at the end. His personal qualities are very much appreciated. Everybody likes him as leader of the party, even some who have doubts about whether he has sufficient ideological grip.
He's had a ghastly summer. His leadership qualities have been questioned throughout. Is he today in control of the party beyond this tight crucible of the Winter Gardens?
Well, I think the response to his speech here and the push for unity here this week from the representatives will give him a greater authority back at Westminster. But as a lot of his cabinet ministers are saying, the question now is whether the dissident MPs in the Tory party are going to allow the government to govern.
And will they take his advice, Michael Dobbs, on that? Have disagreements with me in private, not in public?
Well, I think there's a very strong mood in the party as a whole to make sure that those people who have been speaking up out of turn speak up in privately. But at the end of the day, this is more than just about issues. This has to be, this is more than about image. This has to be about issues. And the real test of unity in the Tory party in the weeks ahead will be how they deal with those difficult issues which they have to confront over the coming weeks. And the great thing about this conference is it's not just been about image, but there does seem to be a real sense of purpose has come back to the party. And it's frankly something they seem to have lost. They've regained it.
We haven't said anything much about the performance, and in fact it was a trooper's performance, was it not, this afternoon?
Well, yes. I mean, the Prime Minister must have been incredibly nervous facing what could have been an ordeal this afternoon. After all that has been said about his leadership, publicly and privately, he knew he was under test, as few leaders have been in facing an assembly like this. And I think he came through it with remarkable authority in those circumstances.
But also a great deal of humour. I mean, he was practically started throwing sweeties at one point with the audience responses going on.
Well, I think that this has been a really truly unique event for John Major. I think that he's feeling a much relieved man right now.
But a virtuoso performance, I mean, perhaps it's in the genes, the entertainment thing.
Well, you know, these people out there, they love to enjoy themselves, but they also need a bit more than enjoyment, because these are the people that are going to have to go back to the constituencies to fight on the doorsteps. And what they've gone back with is not only a sense of optimism, but also some more weapons to use in that battle.
Well, they're still in the hall and they're still responding to platform. Let's go back to the chair and see what she's talking to.
And he will now leave the platform, and I know you'll cooperate. You're a smashing crowd. Thank you, Prime Minister, again. Thank you.
And Dame Wendy Mitchell saying goodbye to the Prime Minister, pleading for a little calm from this enthusiastic conference, asking them to allow the Prime Minister to get away from Blackpool at the end of what has been probably a much more successful day, possibly a more successful conference than he could have hoped for. Sir Basil Feldman with Mrs. Major, Prime Minister, Chairman Norman Fowler, moving out of the hall. The cheering continues, the flag waving. And meeting some of the workers whose commitment and enthusiasm over the next period he relies on. And he's meeting some of the key workers who have been placed where it's possible for them to have a quick word. And if that is stage managed, it's been done very well. This seems like a completely spontaneous meeting and greeting. The Prime Minister with his supporters. Fighting his way out of the Winter Gardens here in Blackpool. And Vivian is on the floor. Over to you.
Bye-bye. Here we go. Here we've got a mini cabinet committee. We've got the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, we've got the Social Security Secretary, and of all the people this week whose reaction wanted to hear, these are the ones we wanted to hear most. Well, if you're going to hear me, Michael Portillo, the first thing he did was to slay the Thatcher dragon pretty plainly, didn't he?
What he did, I thought, in his speech was he identified the instincts of the British people one by one, and he reached out and touched them, their wish for personal independence, personal responsibility, fight against crime, decency in schools, good education. He touched each one of them in turn. It was a brilliant, brilliant performance.
He took an enormous risk in doing it informally, especially at the beginning, making jokes against himself about the microphones being switched on.
Well, he's very good at making a joke against himself. That's why people like him. He's a very natural performer. What he didn't try to do was harness himself to new technology. He spoke quietly and intimately to his conference, and they loved it.
I'm not going to forget the others. One question to you, though. He's put off the opportunity of your taking over just a little longer. No memoirs yet, you said.
I'm not going to deal with that, Vivian. It was a great performance for the Prime Minister, his day alone.
Peter Lilly, he's told you all, and presumably that includes the Cabinet too, all to behave. He warned about the dangers to this party of disunity. Who did you think he was speaking about?
I think he's absolutely right. It's right that if anyone's got any criticisms, they give them in private. In public, we are profoundly behind him. The Cabinet are profoundly behind him, I have to say, in private as well. And we support what we're doing collectively.
So no
speech. Really
so no bastards, no barmies, all those laid to rest?
A lot of warm support here in the hall, swelling out into the country as a whole, I think.
Now, the Secretary of State for Transport next in line is the one to be most concerned about the call for unity. He's got a practical problem, haven't you, Mr McGregor, when Parliament resumes? Do you think those MPs who might rebel will now think, well, I've heard Mr Major, I won't?
I think what's very clear from this conference, as we told you at the beginning of the week,
is that the party is very united behind the policies we're pursuing. That was very clear in the debate you're talking about. There wasn't a speaker wanting to speak against it, I can tell you.
Oh, that was spontaneous? That was just them leaping to support?
Absolutely, absolutely clear. But you pick on a tiny minority all the time. I think it's very clear here. Hasn't today and the whole week said it all.
So no tiny minority in the House of Commons against your rail bill?
That's not the point today. We'll get the rail bill through, but what you've seen today is a man of vision, decency, integrity, and that's what we know the Prime Minister to be, and the whole country can now see it yet again.
John McGregor, you and John Gummer next to you know the Prime Minister personally better than most. Now, John Gummer, I want to put it to you, that was the most Majorite speech we've heard in the sense that it was more easy to recognise him amongst the speech.
Oh, it was him, absolutely. The family values, the concern for what makes Britain really great, the concept of self-reliance, the desire for decency and for honour, all those things which we care about in Britain.
Now I want to ask you if you think that going back to basics, something that you and John Patton next to you think so highly of, will resonate outside this hall. He's done his job here. Everybody's been crying unity and John Major in one breath all week. Now do you think all this back to basics, even reactionary agenda is going to bother or is going to delight the electorate?
Nothing reactionary about saying we don't want crime. Nothing reactionary about saying that you're going to uplift people by asking the highest standards. Nothing reactionary about having decent teaching in schools. Nothing reactionary about our agenda. Our agenda is the agenda of the whole of the British people.
You happy to go on the stump on back to basics? It sounds like an ABC agenda, Secretary of State for Education.
Went down very well in the conference earlier this week during my speech, went down very well during the Prime Minister's speech, went down very well on Question Time last night. Wasn't the Prime Minister brilliant about memoirs? The opening of his speech was terrific. It'd have been a long time before he's going to write any memoirs, or me mine for that matter.
If you've been here just a little earlier, I was saying that he started by slaying Lady Thatcher Dragon, so he did, didn't he?
I just think he was having a little innocent fun, and why shouldn't Prime Ministers have some innocent fun sometimes?
Absolutely fine, and we watched when he said, when the Chancellor you're here, we watched when Mr Major said that this wasn't to be a high tax party, with the greatest of interest to see what your reaction was, because of course we don't know what budget you're going to come up with yet and how that's going to go down. They mightn't stomp and cheer so much for you.
Well, every year we're going to have a party conference where the Chancellor will tell everybody to wait for the budget. But also you'll get a message like that from John Major. It was very good. John decided not to do one of these great riced-about speeches and actually to be John Major. And I think he put across a big position of an honest, honourable man with a very clear vision of what he wanted to do, sensible government, dealing with things that really worry people. And I think as a message from a party conference that was very solid, very sensible, and it's the kind of thing which people out there who like John Major prefer to hear.
You went for enemy bashing yesterday, he went for disunity bashing today. Do you think that those MPs and critics who might have been inclined to vote against aspects of your policies when the unified budget come round will now say, I better shut up?
Well, we not only went for both those, we actually, I think, succeeded. I mean, we've restored unity. The critics have been dispelled this week. And when we go back, Parliament is going to have to show that unity which we temporarily set aside, let's face it, in a kind of civil war over all things Maastricht last winter. We're going to go back as a party that does know what it's about, realises it has to take some difficult decisions, a disciplined party of government. That's not what the others two look like at their conferences. That is what we are. And I think John Major wound it all up by facing his critics, demanding unity, giving a clear and sensible exposition of his views and his purposes, and I think he'll get the loyalty he deserves in Parliament this winter.
But the problems aren't over, the hurdles aren't over. There are Euro elections, a manifesto to be drawn up, there's paying more money to the EC, there's the Intergovernmental Conference. It's one thing getting this lot going, it's another thing keeping the House of Commons quiet and getting things through the lobbies.
I could add a fair few more to that, actually.
Go on.
Well, what you've got at the centre of this is a man who has the courage to face up to all the flack he gets put under sometimes by some of his enemies and some of his former colleagues, actually has the courage to see those things through. If you see John Major, that calm in the face of all the pressure, that clear about what he's going to do, demanding the support and loyalty which he's always got from the vast bulk of the parliamentary party, I think you can feel confident this winter is going to be a Prime Minister in control of events and a government in control of events as well.
Chancellor of the Exchequer, the next and best and biggest event, of course, is going to be a unified budget. Thanks very much indeed. Back to you now, Hugh.
Vivian, we've heard from the Cabinet, we've heard from the pundits. What about the party members? What did you think of it?
An excellent speech. I think you'll recall before the speech I was looking for something on crime and on the economy. I think we had two very, very good inputs on both of those. And I was particularly pleased that the Prime Minister said that we were going to fight pornography, particularly child pornography.
He looked and sounded as a Prime Minister totally at ease with himself, his Cabinet, the government, party and the country. And I was delighted in the very diplomatic way he dealt with the rebels in the party.
Brilliant. He's taken all the tangled threads, laid them out. We're clear where we're going. There's a clear vision, a united party, a great leader, and the boy did well.
We've had a tough time over the last couple of years. I think his speech was absolutely excellent, a much more natural delivery. Never write us off. We've been around for 300 years. Past is past, and we're going to look to the future. And he also targeted the areas on law and order, those sort of things that matter to the ordinary British people.
It was the most intelligent and gutsy statement of Conservative values that John Major has given since he became Prime Minister. I think people wanted a lead, both in the conference and at home. He today gave a lead to which every Conservative and much of the country can and will respond. I enjoyed every minute of it. It was his best yet.
I think John Major's now being seen as the Damon Hill of British politics. I think for the first time his successes are now being seen and recognised, and he's shaking off the brilliant successes of his predecessor, and the party are rallying behind him. And today they've rallied behind him in a unified way, in a way which I think perhaps they haven't in the past. But we're going out and we're determined. John Major today talked about the next election, and he's for the first time perhaps beginning to look forward. He has a new contract, and we welcome the new contract that he's got. Doesn't the Prime Minister, who has to preach party unity at such length throughout the week and on the platform, show that he has got problems?
No, I don't think so. He's had problems in by-elections, and we've had problems maybe in presentation of party policy. And we have had criticisms, we've had some close votes in the House of Commons, but that's behind us, and we're now going forward and looking ahead. And he's been looking ahead today, and there have been some very good, strong, Majorite things in today's speech, which I welcome.
Skillfully papering over the cracks?
No, he wasn't papering over any cracks. What he was doing was setting out what Conservative government will do over the next 3 years on law and order, on the economy, in making our case in the wider world, in Europe and elsewhere. It was a superb statement of Conservative thinking. And as far as unity is concerned, the need for unity is a truth, and there's no harm in repeating the truth again and again and again, and that's what he did. He was right to do it.
On the rebels, a big warning, was it strong enough?
We're a party of a broad church. I would hate to be involved in a party where people couldn't actually voice their opinions. But we know when we have to, that we have to stick together, because that's the way we stay in power. But I would always be opposed to trying to clamp people up, because I wouldn't want to be part of that sort of party. But we're all together on the main issues, and we'll win the next election.
It's a problem for John Major. He's not a brilliant speech maker, not a good orator. Did that come over as a good performance?
That was an excellent performance. If you're talking, if you want a Michael Heseltine, then you have a Michael Heseltine. John Major was relaxed today. He was at ease with himself. He was clear about his vision. He knew he was speaking to a hall that were behind him, and I think it was a terrific performance. Great orator.
On the oratory, a problem?
Yeah, as you said, he is not an orator in the class of Michael Heseltine, but I've always felt that if all 40-odd million voters could see John Major in a fairly small situation, they would vote for him without any hesitation. He has other qualities, as indeed all our people do. The fine oratory doesn't matter, it's what the Prime Minister does at the end of the day.
No matter what the mood is like in Blackpool, it remains to be seen whether that manifests itself at Westminster, and on the basis of the last year, it's not likely to be smooth, is it?
I think today he's united the conference behind him and stamped his authority on it. And he was very, very warmly received. And I think that's going to transmit itself through to the MPs and through to Westminster. Maastricht's behind us now, the agenda's changing, and I think that people will be behind him on that count and on various other things as well. So I think actually he's given what we need today. He's actually led today to the culmination of a very successful week in which he was backed, supported by everybody in this party. He's unified that today. He's given that extra momentum, and I think he's to be congratulated on that. And I think you'll see a different tone when Parliament reconvenes.
That's right. Those are the views of the party members. Was it just a mask? Are they papering over the cracks? We'll see at Westminster over the coming weeks and months. Sheena.
Yes, it's been a fascinating 3 weeks. We saw the Liberal Democrats working hard to fight the one-man party image. We saw John Smith squeaking the narrowest victory on behalf of his modernisers, but not without running up a debt with his traditionalists. And here in Blackpool, John Major rising to face up to and face down his enemies within and without. But perhaps most interestingly, there's two main parties reaffirming what they see as their core values, using the same words, opportunity, community, individual, but in very different ways. Politics is by no means dead. Vivian.
Now the politics show transfers to Westminster, and so for that matter do Mr Major's problems. Here are some items in Mr Major's diary. The Lords go back next week, and the Commons the week after. The rail privatisation bill puts his slim majority straight away to the test, and Europe can still test party unity. There's an intergovernmental conference coming up, a bill to increase our EC contributions, and there's a Euro manifesto to be drawn up. And next, the unified budget. Well, it may be unified, but it's not necessarily going to be unifying for this Conservative Party, as it faces the prospect of increasing taxes or raising public spending, or perhaps both. And then there are 2 election tests in a row, the local elections in May, and then the Euro elections in June. He has to get through both of those. And the script to get John Major through those, well, it hasn't been written yet. But he'll have to perform it to his party's satisfaction if he's to come back to the seaside next year as his party's leader. But as he puts it, he hasn't written his memoirs yet. He's every intention of staying in the job, but now he's packing his bags and off to London, and it's off to London for us too. It's the end of our seaside tour around the party conferences, and now from all of us on the live conference team, it's time to wish you goodbye and thank you very much for watching.
Later than scheduled, in just under 10 minutes, this afternoon's film, Riff Raff. But first, the news on BBC Two with Moira Stewart.